over the course of a lifetime, you got these moments where you have to take a few steps to get from one place to the other. And you got time to think about stuff, like the big picture stuff, like how you got to the place where you're taking these final few steps from the one place to the other. I suppose one of those events is a wedding. You walk down the aisle and you take a minute. And if you're a young lady and your dad's walking you down the aisle, it's what you're both thinking about, like what's ahead, but also how you got here. You walk down the aisle or file in for graduation, like, man, everything that went into this project. And now here we are. Just think about how far we've come. You get on one of the corners of a casket of somebody you love and care about, and you escort them to their final physical resting place. While those steps are being taken, you think about how we got here, where we've been, all the stages in the journey, all of those memories and everything else. And I got a sneaking suspicion that in Matthew chapter 21, as the disciples and Jesus and a couple of guys who were formerly blind and now aren't, and an entourage in general, are making their way up this difficult hike, 17-mile journey, I think it is, from Jericho up the hill into Jerusalem. I'm guessing that people are shooting the breeze and talking and thinking about stuff, but I'm guessing that as Jerusalem comes into focus on the horizon, people aren't in exactly this kind of thinky place. Where did this start? How did we get here? It says in verse 1 of Matthew chapter 21, as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go ahead and to the village ahead, and you'll get a donkey up there, and we're going to talk about the donkey and the triumphal entry and him getting into Jerusalem and the whole bit. But I'm interested in the moment on the trip and what was going through their heads and what that recollection might be, and it seemed like a good opportunity for us, as we get into the home stretch, to reflect on how we got here, because you and I, my friends, have been on a journey through this story as well. So you go back to the beginning of the thing, and the whole thesis of the whole story is spelled out in the first verse, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew calls him the Christ right there. Nobody officially gets that title right until chapter 16. It's Peter who finally gets it, and Peter only gets it according to Jesus because God opened his eyes to that. But this is one of those stories where, because of the way the story gets told, the gauntlet is thrown down at the beginning. I'm telling you, Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, says Matthew. He's the son of David, the son of Abraham. What he's intoning there is that he's a completion of everything that came before, all of the law and the prophets. He's the fulfillment of all of that stuff. And Matthew's effectively saying, I dare you to see it otherwise. Here's the story of how it went down. And then he opens with a big genealogy. Every name on there would have conjured some kind of memory. And then it's bookended with Matthew saying, again, there are 14 generations from Abraham to David, from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Christ, the Messiah. Again, Matthew is drilling this point home, and then he's going to hit it one more time in the very next verse, and this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about, the Christ, the Messiah. Then he gives us a few of these narrative beats about Jesus' family and some of the politics surrounding things, and Matthew points out how everything that's happening with Jesus is a fulfillment of all the things in the Old Testament that were a description of what the Messiah was going to be like. Herod dies, Jesus' life is spared because supernaturally his family is redirected to Egypt. They come back from Egypt, they set up shop in Nazareth, which is this city on a ridge getting up toward the Sea of Galilee, not all the way into the place where most of the book happens. And then the narrative goes quiet for a long time. I guess Jesus just grows up. The next thing we get in this story is John the Baptist. Oh man, remember John? Wow, that's a beautiful story, but that's a tough one, they probably all thought, as they reflected on him because of how things ended for John the Baptist. But man, what a firebrand. That guy was all courage. Go out in the desert. He's not even coming to you. He's just going to go out here and say things that are so true and so compelling that people will come to him. And then he baptizes them and is pointing to this arrival of the kingdom and saying, repent, get ready for it. Whichever way you were going, that ain't the right way. Turn toward this thing to be prepared for it. Jesus himself shows up. John, his cousin, baptizes Jesus, and then the whole Trinity shows up. God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the voice from heaven says, this is my son, whom I love. With him I'm well pleased. By this point, even at the end of chapter 3, as these guys are thinking back on how it all unfolded, they're like, it was right in front of our faces right there, wasn't it? that Jesus is the Son of God, that he's the Christ, the Messiah. I wonder why it took us so long to figure that out. And then in chapter 4, Jesus goes off grid and he passes the test that every single person ever has failed. I often wonder how the disciples, who are reflecting back on all of this during this hike, would have known the details of this story if Jesus told them, if it came to light in some other way. But Jesus is in the middle of nowhere for 40 days, and the devil himself is pestering him and tempting him. And Jesus depends on his relationship with his Father and with the Bible itself to fend off those temptations. And after that, Jesus goes public. He comes back, he brings on a bunch of followers who he calls with a very minimal effort, and they all just drop what they're doing and follow him. Jesus travels throughout the area that most of the rest of the story is going to unfold in. He does miraculous things. People all the way off in Syria are hearing about this stuff. People across the Jordan and in the Decapolis are hearing about this stuff. People way down south in Jerusalem and Judea are hearing about this stuff, and large crowds are gathering up in this obscure part of the world. And the disciples are probably like, remember that? That was like our first day at work. He just came and he showed up and he invited us to things. And then people came, Ray. People most definitely came from all over the place. And that's kind of when we started to realize that we were dealing with something different here, something different than what we'd ever seen. Then in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, we get the Sermon on the Mount. It's the Kingdom Manifesto. It's the explanation of everything that Jesus, well, not quite everything, but a whole lot of what Jesus is going for. It's a sample of what the values of the kingdom, the currency of the kingdom are about. And it's all held up as a contrast to the world system values and even the very worldly religious system values that were common in the day. He doesn't exactly spell out what it looks like to sign up or to participate. He just describes this thing authoritatively and as though this is the only thing that would have value or make sense to do. And everybody's marveling at it and trying to figure out what to do with his teachings at the end of this thing about don't build your house on a unstable, sandy foundation, build it on the rock that will weather the tests of time and everything else that comes your way. And as they're wrestling with that, miracles start happening left and right. The question is he really as authoritative as he sounds? And the answer is, well, yeah, apparently so, because he doesn't care about somebody's uncleanness. He just heals a guy of leprosy. Touching a dude with leprosy is a huge no-no. That would have blown people's minds. Then another unclean person comes up, a Gentile, an outsider, a Roman occupier, and he recognizes Jesus for all the authority that he has. So in chapter 7, people are like, wow, that was really authoritative teaching. I wonder what to make of it. Well, the centurion, the outsider, is like, I know what to make of it. I know authority when I see it. I do authority for a living. That's authority. So much authority, in fact, that I'm comfortable with in front of everybody here asking you to do something ridiculous. That is, save my servant from being dead. And Jesus delivers on that. Then after that, there's a whole bunch of other miracles, both small and large, people wrestling with what it would look like to follow Jesus and to sign up for this kingdom. Some of them do, some of them balk at it. Jesus starts to heal in ways that draws the attention and the ire of the religious leadership in chapter 9. And as the disciples are hiking up toward Jerusalem, they're probably starting to think, like, when did this all go sideways with these people who are here waiting for us, angry about what's happening? It was probably with the healing of that paralytic, wasn't it? The guy that got lowered through the ceiling. You guys remember that, right? And then Jesus, it was like he was only sort of paying attention to the kid. He tells him his sins are forgiven. Then everybody's mad. And now Jesus is talking to these religious leaders and he heals the kid. And he's like, I have the authority to forgive. Look at this. And he demonstrates that authority. I think that's when it went sideways, guys, right? Well, then there's a whole bunch more examples that maybe some of the other disciples are chiming in with. And they're like, I don't know. Maybe the thing where we were walking through the field and eating food after he sent us out on our great big open world quest to go and tell people about all of this stuff. It was somewhere in there, though, that it turned really, really weird. It probably reflected on how much simpler things were before what we call chapter 10, where they got sent out on the big open world quest to go tell people about the kingdom. Because it's kind of just them and miraculous things happen and people scratching their heads. But then the stakes got high after that and people started getting grouchy. Even John the Baptist wasn't quite sure what to do with it. The crowds were wishy-washy. Then there's more and more controversies and tension with the religious leaders over questions of what you're allowed to do and not do on the Sabbath. Like, are you allowed to heal somebody's withered arm on the Sabbath? I mean, you think that would be a good thing? But no, the answer wasn't obvious, and people were mad about it. And then they're probably thinking, like, I remember when Jesus pivoted away from the really overt through the front door teaching that was meant for everybody to hear and get, and he went to that more he who has an ear, let him hear approach that we started to see in Matthew 13 with the whole kingdom parables thing. And he taught in parables, and it really drove a wedge, didn't it? Some people heard it and got it or were willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and roll with it. Some people didn't, and it just made them angrier and harder. And the results speak for itself in terms of the political stakes ratcheting up with Herod killing John. That's about the time John died, wasn't it? Yeah, guys, that was about the time. And I have to think that as that crossed their mind, they couldn't help but wonder if the same fate that befell John, or the same fate that Jesus was saying was going to befall him, might befall each one of them. Was there some nervousness and fear hiking up this hill from Jericho into Jerusalem? In chapter 14, Jesus does miraculous stuff, even though people are constantly pressing in on him. He's investing in the disciples. I'm sure they're remembering that and better appreciating as they're on this hike how much of an investment that was under such difficult circumstances. And they're probably remembering that every time they came back into contact with the religious political establishment of the day, it was miserable. But guys, remember, every time we got away, we learned new things, and it was just us, and it was awesome, and we had a sense and a clarity of what we were doing. And remember that road trip that we took up north in what we would call chapter 15, where he even showed mercy on that Gentile outsider, that lady who came to him. And then we finished up that road trip, and even though he's beaten up and exhausted, and he's clearly thinking ahead to something else, he's still so invested in everybody. He has compassion on those people. He wouldn't even send them away hungry, worried that they might collapse on the way. So he feeds everybody miraculously. And then remember, we're sitting around the campfire, and remember Peter finally chimed in. I think we all knew what the answer was to his question about who do you say I am? But Peter is the one who's brave enough to say it. And Jesus said he was right. But hey, Peter, settle down. Like, lest you start thinking you're fancy or important. He also called you Satan right after that when you said that you were going to fight to try to stop him from being killed here in Jerusalem when we get here. And then probably 3 of them are still trying to describe to the others like what it was like to go up the hill in chapter 17 right after that, and to see Jesus in his glory and with Moses and Elijah there, and to hear from God and to not have any idea what you do when something like that happens. And then we come down from that awesome moment, and again, he's like, no, I'm serious. I'm going to get killed. That's how this thing is going to end. And then I'll be raised back to life. And then you get into what we call chapter 18, and these guys are probably remembering the words that Jesus said about what this was going to look like when he's gone. Here's how the assembly of people who continue to follow Jesus even after he's dead and brought back to life. Here's what you do. Here's how you treat each other. And at this point, they're down to very recent memories. And like, God, then we crossed some state lines and we started this trip here that we're just about to wrap up. I remember that rich kid that came up and asked those questions of Jesus, and that sent our heads spinning. And then we're asking what's going to be left for us. And he gives us that teaching about the first being last, the last being first. Where should we be in this line? And then remember when you 2 clowns tried to reserve seats at the right and left hand of Jesus in the afterlife? Like, come on, guys, this is just lame. Hopefully they were badgering each other and having a laugh about that at this point. And then he just healed those 2 guys, like those guys right there that are walking with us. And now they're here. It's just crazy to think about how those guys got in the line that we're in right now, and how we got in the line that we're in right now. And now here we are all together, and there's Jerusalem on the horizon. And now here we are. They're thinking to themselves as they step up on top of the Mount of Olives and look over the whole scene and take in where everything is going to come to a head and everything is going to resolve from this gigantic story that covers not only their last several years of life, but I believe they're convinced at this point that the story that's going to resolve in Jerusalem is going to be a resolution to all of history, all of the story that has been unfolding. The only story they really know, the meta-narrative of everything, is headed toward resolution right here. And here they are taking in the whole scene. This is a lot to take in one episode, but hey, we're 20 chapters in and we're walking along with the disciples up the hill to this place. It seems like a really good opportunity to reflect back on where they've been and where we've been and to anticipate where we're going next. My buddy Shane, who I talked to you about, who does the Psalms Project, which I think is awesome, I mentioned the other day that he was just about to release a brand new psalm, and that new psalm is going live like as we speak. And I'd be so grateful if, as a gesture of support to my good friend and a way to put something that is genuinely excellent in your life, if you would go over to Spotify and give that a stream, give it a listen here today. Again, that's the Psalms Project on Spotify. All right, next time around, we get into the fateful home stretch of the book of Matthew. Should be exciting. I'm Matt. This is the 10 Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.